Hey, Margie here. So many of us are taking supplements for our bones and overall health, but there's so many questions when it comes to supplements that many of us don't know the answer to. The absorption of a certain supplement, the quality, what do we need to look for? What are the most important supplements for bone health? Well, we are going to answer all those questions today on the podcast with our very special guest, Dr. Eric Viegas. And Dr. Viegas is a licensed naturopathic doctor in Ontario, Canada. He's currently the Quality Innovation Manager for Fullscript's Integrative Medical Advisory Team, focusing mainly on supplement quality and practitioner continuing education. So in this episode, we answer all your questions. I've learned so much from interviewing Dr. Eric, and I'm excited to share all this information with all of you. So stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Eric. It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Margie.
You know, the truth is, this is such an important topic because people are taking so many supplements, and oftentimes they have no idea if it's the right supplement or that it matters. You know, it's not as though one size fits all and that they can just go and buy any old supplement. So I'm excited that we're going to sort of dive into this and really clear things up for people. So thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
What we're going to do is we're going to start with the most important, I guess the most important. There's a lot of important supplements, but we're going to start with the most common ones that people are taking for osteoporosis. So one, of course, is calcium. And that's one that everybody knows about, that they need enough calcium for their bones. And oftentimes we don't get it from our food. So when people supplement, what is the biggest issue when it comes to quality of calcium?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of big issues. But as we briefly chatted before we started recording the podcast, calcium supplements are widely available, but not all are created equal. So some quality concerns that your listeners should keep an eye on. I think first and foremost, presence of contaminants. So making sure that manufacturers and brands that sell calcium supplements are testing for contaminants like heavy metals. That includes lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. There are a few others I think that are starting to pop up in industry reports like chromium, but those I think are the most widely tested heavy metals. Other contaminants to think about here are micro contaminants. So pathogens that could potentially be in a supplement and make someone sick, which shouldn't be in there. You can also think about contaminants that are added intentionally. So unfortunately, there are some bad players out in the industry that are adding things like pharmaceutical ingredients, which we definitely don't want to show up in supplements, as well as certain contaminants that are added to enhance the visual appearance of some supplements. So for example, curcumin, cinnamon, these are ingredients that were highlighted as being contaminated with lead chromate. Lead chromate is added really to enhance the visual appeal of those spices. And unfortunately, there are a lot of reports about things like, applesauce containing cinnamon that's high in lead, curcumin spices that people are picking up in the grocery store that are high in lead. So it's very, very important that, your listeners think about what these brands are testing and ask for proof, that testing is ongoing, not just for the finished products, but also for the raw materials and for every batch of raw materials, finished products. So unfortunately, some industry players might test every other batch or every few batches. We want to ensure that every batch is tested and everything is traceable. Another, I think, big thing here with quality and calcium supplements is actual calcium content versus what's listed on the label. So, people should be mindful of, it'll say on the label, like, for example, calcium citrate, a certain amount, or calcium carbonate, a certain amount. Pay attention to actually how much calcium is in that supplement and make sure that, that's being tested by the brand and it can be verified as such. Another concern here is the presence of unwanted fillers or additives. That can certainly affect the supplement's purity and safety. You can think about things like food colorings, things like, magnesium stearate for some people, they just can't tolerate it. Unfortunately, things like lactose are also showing up as unwanted fillers. So, for someone who's lactose intolerant, that's not great. So, again, focusing on that purity and safety and being mindful of those excipients or kind of like non-active ingredients in the supplement. I think taking a step back from that, I did talk about testing, but you want to think about the journey of the supplement from seed to shelf, so to speak. So thinking about, how if for example, it's a botanical, how it's grown, how it's treated, how it's harvested, if it's tested, right, in that raw material stage, how it's handled, how it's manufactured, right? So making sure that, whatever supplement you pick up, that brand, their facility, as well as their products are certified for good manufacturing practices. Very, very important here in terms of, that contamination topic, because contamination can happen when good manufacturing practices are not followed. And then going, beyond manufacturing, thinking about distribution and storage of supplements, which is very, very important, right? Because, for example, you don't want your probiotics to not be refrigerated, right? Because that will mean that, the colony forming units that are on the label potentially are much lower than what's in the bottle.
Interesting. I guess it depends. Certain of them have to be refrigerated, certain don't, but certainly the ones that have to be refrigerated.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting. I know people get overwhelmed with everything because there's so much to deal with when you're dealing with osteoporosis in your bones. And are there certain organizations that, are there certain stamps, that you can like I know the USDA when we're dealing with food in terms of the organic, are there certain things people could look for that help them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. USDA organic is a certification that people can look for on their product labels that will ensure that, organic ingredients are used, non-GMO ingredients are used, as well as certain aspects of good manufacturing practices. The National Sanitation Foundation, or NSF, is another good certifying body that's out there, one of the larger organizations. They're worldwide. They actually have certified a number of Fullscript's distribution centers for CGMP. So, they'll come in, every, few months or so. They'll take a look at, how things are segmented, making sure that when products are received, they're received appropriately, they're cataloged appropriately, they're put out on the floor or stored appropriately, and conducting things like mock recalls, right? So if a product needs to be recalled, ensuring that that company has the necessary procedures in place to conduct a recall. Simple things as well, like temperature, humidity in facilities, pest control. One of the biggest things for sure will be cleaning, hygienic practices, making sure that, areas are clean and, that will help to reduce the risk of contamination. But that being said, there are a lot of third-party certifications out there. And the neat thing about third-party certifications are that you can personalize it to your own quality needs. So, for example, if you're an athlete and you are tested for banned substances, there's informed choice, informed for sport. There's NSF certified for sport. The great thing about third-party certs is you can find one that really aligns with your values and then kind of make your decision from there.
Oh, okay. Wow. So interesting. So it really matters, that you trust where you're purchasing your supplements from, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's go back to calcium. Okay. So
Sure.
We're going to try to get it from our food first. Do you have any favorite food sources of calcium?
I like dairy products. I know not everyone can have dairy, but the nice thing is that there are dairy alternatives that are fortified with calcium. I would just ask, people be mindful of what type of calcium or what form of calcium is in those fortified foods, what the dosage is. But of course, leafy green vegetables, a nice source of calcium, nuts, seeds. And then there are lesser known sources of calcium like tofu and certain types of fish like sardines and salmon. So, getting a variety of those foods in your diet can certainly help to ensure an adequate calcium intake.
Okay, so now the person who doesn't get an adequate source of calcium and they're going to supplement, you want to just talk about a little bit about the different forms and the bioavailability?
Sure. Yes. So there are a lot of different forms of calcium. I can touch on a few. Each of them will have different bioavailability, and indications. I always recommend that, before someone starts a supplement of any kind, that they speak directly with their healthcare provider to determine which form is best for them and what dose is best. So, we could start it off with maybe the most common and least expensive form of calcium, and that's calcium carbonate. It does actually contain the highest amount of elemental calcium at 40% roughly, but it requires stomach acid for absorption, making it best taken with food. Now, studies do suggest that while it's effective for bone support, it may cause gastrointestinal discomfort in some people, again, for maybe people that don't produce enough stomach acid. So it's also unclear whether calcium carbonate provides better, less, or equivalent effects on the suppression of bone resorption markers than calcium citrate when taken with a meal. But it does appear to be less effective when taken on an empty stomach. So, for example, at bedtime. So I always recommend that people take their calcium supplements with food.
I just wanted to say calcium carbonate in this population, stomach acid's a problem, and many people do not have enough stomach acid. And so it actually even reduces stomach acid. So it's not one that I ever recommend because of that, just that reason that you mentioned.
And that makes a lot of sense. So I'm guessing maybe you're more inclined to recommend a calcium citrate for that reason.
I like that.
Okay, great. So we can chat a little bit about that. So calcium citrate, that contains about 21% of elemental calcium. And as we kind of touched on, it's more easily absorbed than calcium carbonate, especially in people with low stomach acid. And so it's less likely to cause digestive issues and can be taken with or without food for some people. So some studies do show sort of equivalent bioavailability to calcium carbonate when taken with food or in a fasted state. Another one to touch on here, and this is probably one that people don't see very often because it's typically used in hospital settings for patients with severe calcium deficiencies, and that's calcium gluconate. That contains about 9% elemental calcium, which is really interesting. That's very low, right? And so it's used in hospitals. It's less commonly used in over-the-counter supplements due to that low calcium content. But it does provide similar bioavailability to calcium carbonate and calcium citrate in a fasted state. The final, I think, form of calcium I wanted to touch on here is calcium hydroxyapatite, or MCHC for short, microcrystalline hydroxyapatite complex. Quite a mouthful. That contains 21% elemental calcium, but a note here is that it's derived from animal bone, and it's therefore not appropriate for vegetarians or vegans. So because it's derived from that kind of whole food source, it contains calcium, phosphorus, bone metabolism proteins, including osteocalcin, type 1 collagen, insulin growth factor type 1 and 2, as well as transforming growth factor beta or TGF beta. So a meta-analysis actually shows that MCHC users actually had a higher bone mineral density, mainly through kind of like a slowdown of bone loss than those who take calcium carbonate. Comparative studies that have been published since the release of that meta-analysis have actually continued to support that relationship with similar, if not slightly better, adverse effect profiles compared to carbonate.
Yeah, no, that's great. Those are the two that I recommend for people.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And they, okay, so now what about taken with magnesium? A lot of people, you talked about the timing with or without food, but what about taking it, some people take combinations with magnesium, and is there any issue you found, and I know, with absorption, if it's taken at the same time as magnesium, or should it be taken separately?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I think it's up to healthcare provider and their patient to determine when's the best time to take those nutrients, whether that's together or separate. But as you pointed out, calcium and magnesium can compete for absorption in the digestive tract, and taking them together in high doses may actually reduce the absorption of both. So it is generally recommended to take them at different times of the day. So, for example, you could take your calcium with a meal. While magnesium, you could take that perhaps before bed to help with relaxation and sleep. There was a study published in the Journal of Nutrition, I believe in 2017, that found that high doses of calcium, which were, I believe, around a gram a day, significantly reduced magnesium absorption in humans. So generally, yes, take them apart. But I'm a big fan of, if someone can't remember or, they're just not going to take it, I'd rather they take them together than not at all.
Right, exactly. You have to do what works. But I do the
Exactly.
same thing. I recommend exactly what you had just said, that if you're taking calcium, you take that sometime earlier during the day. And magnesium is just so relaxing and helps so many people with sleep that taking it, at dinner or later, it seems to be so helpful. So we are so on the same page. Let's go to magnesium then. Are there any qualities? Are there any concerns about quality of magnesium that we need to look at? Anything different?
I would say it's very similar across the board. We want to make sure that there's safety, there's efficacy, and there's personalization. So again, making sure that if you do select a magnesium supplement, that there's proof of testing that the product is free from, again, heavy metals, microcontamination, drugs, that sort of thing. So for purity and free from contaminants. What's interesting is that there have been, I think, more recently, a lot more industry and news reports around magnesium supplements. So, for example, earlier this year, Consumer Labs actually reported that they found some magnesium supplements contained less magnesium than claimed on the label, or were actually contaminated with heavy metals. And additionally, the presence of unlisted ingredients or harmful additives were noted as a concern. To kind of echo these findings, 2 years prior to that, in December of 2022, Now Foods, which is a large supplement brand, tested various magnesium glycinate supplements that were actually sold online on Amazon. So they tested around 16 products, and they found that while 12 of them met label claims for total magnesium content, none actually met the claims for the soluble chelated form of magnesium glycinate. So that's really interesting, right? The more that I'm digging into, supplement testing, the more I see that methods for testing kind of vary from one manufacturer to another. It's best that, when you're looking at things like a certificate of analysis, making sure that the methods that are followed in there are verified methods, like those established by the Association of Official Agricultural Chemists, or AOAC for short. What was interesting about the Now Foods report was that many of those brands were actually found to substitute higher quality chelated magnesium with cheaper forms. And it's an unfortunate issue in the industry. Either the brand knowingly or unknowingly is simply blending glycine with magnesium oxide or carbonate and then labeling the product as magnesium glycinate. So now actually tested first for that magnesium content. And then a really interesting way to test for magnesium glycinate is just to see how quick it dissolves in water, because it's very highly soluble in water. So that's the second step that they used. And again, they found that a lot of these products were just kind of sprinkling in glycine with those lower quality forms of magnesium. Again, the difference here is that the improperly labeled product is much lower cost, and it's not fully reacted or bonded chelate. So there's a higher chance of gastrointestinal issues, which is not usually the case with magnesium glycinate, right? People will typically take magnesium glycinate because it's a little bit gentler on their GI tract. So the article, which your listeners can actually access directly on Now Foods' website, highlights discrepancies in labeling practices as well, with some brands actually misrepresenting the actual magnesium content and form used in their products. And that's something that it really bugs me, when I look at a supplement label, and it's sort of confusing as to like, what's the dose of this ingredient, right? There could be a complex instead of the name of the actual ingredient. There could be a proprietary blend, and in which case you don't actually know how much you're getting of that ingredient.
It's so upsetting because people are spending a lot of money. We have good intentions. We're trying to help ourselves. And then to hear that there's corruption like that, that's why it's so good that there are agencies, and we'll talk about that more later, who protect us so we don't have to figure all this out ourselves. But I think it's important that you just don't go and buy the cheapest thing on the market, because unfortunately, it just may not be effective. And, even have contaminants, just very upsetting. So let's go through, because there are a lot of different magnesiums. There's so many.
Yes.
You want to talk about the different types? Because I know for certain people, certain ones are really more indicated.
Yes, absolutely. So similar to calcium, there are a lot of different forms of magnesium, but I thought I would touch on some of the more popular forms. And I'll start with, again, kind of the forms that are higher in terms of elemental magnesium, but perhaps lower in bioavailability. So the first one to start with, magnesium oxide. That contains a high percentage of elemental magnesium. And so it's easy on your budget. It tends to be a cheaper ingredient, but again, has lower bioavailability and does carry a high burden of gastrointestinal upset. Unfortunately, working in clinical practice, prior to that, working at, health food stores, working at supplement dispensaries, I would encounter a lot of people actually that were taking magnesium oxide or magnesium citrate because they had hard stools or constipation, which really is sort of just a Band-Aid solution, right? It's using a product that has a known osmotic laxative effect. And over time, you can habituate to that. You'll have to move on to perhaps stronger laxatives instead of really addressing the root cause and modifying your diet, modifying your lifestyle to help address that. So the other form that I unfortunately saw, people potentially abusing for that osmotic laxative effect was magnesium citrate. It does have higher bioavailability compared to oxide, but it does carry that osmotic laxative effect as well. Not as much as oxide. So it's often recommended for people who don't tolerate oxide.
It's all different levels. So there are a lot of people who have constipation who were on serious medications. They'll be on all sorts of prescription medications, and they were able to get off with magnesium citrate. And it's really one of the something that's like recommended all the time. And it works. So you're saying that term is not a great idea because you need to sort of correct the problem as well. Is that your thought?
Ideally, yes. But again, if it's prescribed by your healthcare provider and you're being closely monitored while you're weaning off your medications, no problem. My concern was that these people were self-prescribing and taking very high dosages, and again, not really addressing the root cause.
And what would you consider of that to be a high dose that you would be concerned about?
Yeah, just upping the dose over time. So again, noticing that it's not having the same effect that maybe it had before, upping the dose even higher, and then eventually becoming habituated and needing to go on to maybe stronger laxatives that are botanically based, like senna or cascara, which carry a whole host of other potential adverse effects.
But for the person that it just helps them keep regular and they don't need to up it?
I wouldn't be concerned in that situation, especially if they're being monitored by a healthcare provider.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, so the next form, we touched on it earlier when I talked about some of those industry reports, is magnesium glycinate. So this form is actually bonded or chelated with glycine, which is considered a non-essential amino acid, which is really interesting because I think it's an amino acid that's really timely. It does potentially have a bit of a relaxing effect. That combination of magnesium with glycinate makes it very bioavailable, very gentle on the stomach. And it's commonly used actually for sports performance, muscle support, things like headaches as well. So I'm a big fan of magnesium glycinate. I personally take it every day. And I've definitely noticed a big benefit, especially after, a hard day of training. The next form, I think that perhaps you were kind of alluding to when you said, indications, is magnesium malate. So this is a magnesium that's combined with malic acid, which is involved in energy production. And it's also been studied for muscle support effects, but on the pain side more than necessarily performance. So those people who are struggling with muscle pain, their healthcare provider might prescribe magnesium malate. And then the final form that I think is gaining a lot more popularity, a lot more renewed interest, is magnesium threonate. So this form has actually, been studied for supporting mental function, for supporting mood, and it has the noted ability, albeit in limited mechanistic and animal studies, to cross the blood-brain barrier. So there are human studies to show When people supplement with magnesium 3 and 8, it might actually elevate brain levels of magnesium, hence why it potentially can be helpful for mood and mental health. And the studies have mostly been conducted with a proprietary form called Magtein, and that's mainly manufactured by one company. So that specific form, that Magtein form, is also very highly studied.
Now, that's so interesting. And in terms of what's your feeling on some of the products that combine different ones? And sometimes they don't tell you the percentage. As you said, they may say proprietary blend, but what's your feeling when they, put a few of them together?
I think that's totally fine if people want to, consume a few different types. But again, if they're using that oxide form, that citrate form, just be careful. There might be, a greater potential there for digestive upset.
Yeah, it was interesting because there was one supplement that I had been interested in the past, and I didn't realize once I looked at the composition, it was the majority of it was oxide, and I had no idea because the other two, what else was in it, was so good. So,
Interesting.
That's such a good point. So, yes. So thank you about that. Now, I know that you have a magnesium handout. Do you want to just talk about that? Because we can make that available, right, to people?
Sure. Yeah. So part of my role at Fullscript is actually to spot test products directly from our distribution center. I actually travel to Arizona a few times a year, hand pick products and ship them off to either Alchemist Labs or Eurofins Labs. So I actually tested these magnesium products nearing the end of last year. And I think we selected quite a large number. And the average magnesium content in those products, like overall, was 101.58%. So a notable difference compared to some of the other industry reports that we've seen. That something to mention here as well, the products were in various delivery formats. So I don't know how you feel about the different delivery formats out there, Margie, if you have a strong opinion one way or another. We actually tested capsules, soft gels, liquids, and gummies, in addition to powders. Something to mention here is overage of active ingredients. So overage would essentially be over 100% of the label claim on the supplement. So the U.S. Food and Drug Administration actually mandates that dietary supplements meet label claims until expiration. So manufacturers will actually add extra active ingredients, so to speak, to ensure compliance. So unfortunately, delivery formats, some of them have less integrity than others, meaning that they degrade more rapidly over time. And two of those formats that I'm very familiar with that kind of lack that integrity are gummies and liquids. They tend to lose potency very quickly and require additional overages. So interestingly, the FDA actually does not provide any guidance on overages. They just want manufacturers to make sure that by the time the product expires, it still contains roughly 100% of the label claim. Whereas up here in Canada, Health Canada actually accepts 80 to 120% of label claims for products. And that's to do with stability concerns and the potential of variances of active ingredients in raw materials. So for example, EPA and DHA content in fish oil. So I'm not sure if you have a preference for a certain delivery format. I'm of the opinion, if someone can't swallow capsules, I'd rather give them a powder over a liquid or a gummy. But that being said, again, adherence is a big thing, right? So if someone's more likely to take their liquid every day, sure, it might be a little bit of a lower dose than something like a powder or a capsule, but that at least ensures that they're being consistent and they're sticking to their treatment plan.
Wow, that's so interesting. So what you're saying is they may have more ingredients initially, so they can even be taking more than they think initially with the liquid, and then it can degrade much quicker. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's a concern as well, right? Certain ingredients might interact with medications, and a healthcare provider and their patient might not know the exact overage that's in a product. So that's something as well to be mindful of. Again, why it's important to ask for that potency testing. ask for certificates of analysis from manufacturers, just so you can get a sense of maybe what their overage standards are, or outright ask them, how much overage is in your gummy, how much overage is in your shelf-stable probiotic. And then that way there are no surprises and you know roughly what the dosage will be.
I mean, the other problem with the liquid is when it's in the dropper, it's just not exact. Unlike
yes, fair enough.
capsule. There's there's a vitamin K2 that I like, but it's very hard to figure out how much you're truly getting when you're doing your drop by drop. So yes, that's very interesting though about the degrading. I didn't know that. What about capsules versus pills? Have you noticed any difference between that?
Capsules and pills, I would say, are probably the highest integrity if we're thinking about like the degradation of active ingredients over time. Generally, forms that contain water are what contribute to that degradation. So liquids and gummies. There was actually, I forget who conducted the study. It might have also been Now Foods, but they conducted a study on creatine gummies. And the interesting thing about creatine is that it is very unstable when it's exposed to water. So unfortunately, a lot of the gummies that were tested didn't even contain any creatine. So just something to be mindful of. There are, good players within the industry. There are certainly, good gummies out there, but it's important people are aware of that issue.
Wow. So what about the powders?
Powders as well. Powders are generally, they have that integrity as well.
Hey, Margie here. As a physical therapist, I know firsthand how important exercise is for our bones, overall health, and happiness. And unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion on what exercises are safe and effective for people with osteoporosis. That's why I created this handout that contains a 30-minute video where I explain the concepts so you understand the do's and don'ts when it comes to exercise. And this is important because this way you can go into any class and know what you should be doing and what you should avoid. Because too many people are doing exercises that actually increase their risk of spinal fractures. I also included videos of me demonstrating effective balance, posture, and weight-bearing exercises you can put into your day right away. So all you need to do to access this handout, it's free, is go to tinyurl.com/osteoporosis exercises. So it's tinyurl.com, again, /osteoporosis exercises, or you can click the link in the show notes. Now back to the show. Okay, so vitamin D, we all know that that's so important for our bone health. And most people in the community and most physicians are ordering the 25-hydroxy vitamin D. So that's the good news, that people are getting those values and they are able to sort of adjust how much they need. But you want to just talk about, because some people don't know the difference between D2 versus D3.
Sure. Yeah, I can touch on that briefly, but actually I wanted to talk about just briefly the magnesium and vitamin D relationship, because I think maybe people aren't aware of that. So magnesium is also a cofactor in the enzymatic reactions that convert vitamin D to its active form, which is known as calcitriol, or the larger way of saying it, which is 125 dihydroxy vitamin D. So, that process of converting vitamin D to its active form requires hydroxylation, and that's dependent on magnesium-containing enzymes. So magnesium is actually needed for both the 25 hydroxylation in the liver and the 1-alpha hydroxylation in the kidneys, which then converts vitamin D to its active hormone form. What's interesting is that when magnesium levels are insufficient, that can also lead to suboptimal conversion of vitamin D into its active form, potentially causing low levels of active vitamin D, even when someone is taking quite a substantial dose of vitamin D. So something to just, I think, be aware of.
I think that's a very important point, because you wouldn't think that you see your levels, okay, let's up the vitamin D. Rarely will someone tell you, oh, let's up the magnesium, because it's also hard to test for magnesium. It's not like vitamin D where there's just a simple test to know what's going on.
Agreed. I believe there is an RBC magnesium that can be tested. As to the sensitivity and specificity of that test, I'm not entirely sure. But it's something that you can maybe discuss with your healthcare provider for anyone that's listening and interested in that.
Yeah, because a lot of times people will say, "Oh, my blood magnesium is fine," but that's not actually, telling you what's going on in the bones and what's going on other places as well. Because you're
Very true.
taking from from the bones to make sure that the blood level's okay. So, okay, so let's go
Absolutely.
back to vitamin D. So you want to just share a little bit about the difference between D2 and D3?
Sure. Yeah. I think at sort of like a high level, studies have shown that vitamin D3 is actually more effective than vitamin D2 at raising and maintaining adequate levels of vitamin D in the bloodstream. D2 is known as ergocalciferol. But I actually wanted to ask you, are you aware of where D3 actually is derived from?
Vitamin D3?
Vitamin D3, yeah. There are a few different sources, but I'm curious if the most kind of popular source, and I'll go into that in detail.
Yeah, why don't you share with us? Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah. So D3 can actually be derived from lichen, fish oil, or I think the most common source, which is lanolin from sheep's wool. So this process is really interesting. I just wanted to kind of take your listeners through it. I thought it was a really interesting thing to kind of go through. But the process begins with shearing of sheep's wool. Lanolin is extracted from the wool through a process called scouring, which involves washing the wool with hot water and detergent to remove the lanolin. From there, the raw lanolin is then purified to, of course, remove impurities, resulting in a high purity lanolin that's then processed further. What's interesting is that just like vitamin D, which is cholesterol based, lanolin contains cholesterol, which is chemically converted into 7-dehydrocholesterol. And interestingly, this compound is the same one found in human skin that actually converts to vitamin D3 upon exposure to UVB light. So as you can probably guess, that 7-dehydrocholesterol is then exposed to UVB light in a controlled environment, which converts it into pre-vitamin D3. And then that pre-vitamin D3 undergoes thermal isomerization, where it's converted into vitamin D3, also known as cholecalciferol. And then that resulting D3 is purified and processed into a form suitable for use in dietary supplements. What's great about this form is that, as I mentioned before, it's highly bioavailable. It's stable. So this form of D3 is stable. It can be easily incorporated into various supplement forms like tablets, capsules, and liquids. And it has widespread use. So due to its effectiveness and stability, that lanolin-derived D3 is widely used in over-the-counter supplements. As I mentioned earlier, D3 generally more efficacious when it comes to adequate vitamin D in the bloodstream. What's also really nice is that this form of vitamin D3 that's derived from lanolin is sustainable, since lanolin is a byproduct of the wool industry. Using it to produce D3 is a sustainable practice because you're making use of an existing resource without an additional environmental impact. And it's also versatile. So, unfortunately, vegans won't necessarily want to consume lanolin-derived vitamin D3, but it can be used by vegetarians, and it is suitable for people who are avoiding fish products. So for those people who are vegan, who are listening, there are vitamin D3 products that are derived from lichen, which is a type of symbiotic organism that's actually found in nature.
Okay. And usually the D2 is more in the pharmaceutical. Is that what you found in terms of?
Typically, yes. And that's also the form that I've seen in a lot of fortified foods. So just be careful of if you think you're getting a good dose of vitamin D from some fortified foods, ensure that, it's not necessarily that D2 form, that you are getting that D3 form.
Yeah, because sometimes when people have such low vitamin D, they'll be put on a supplement, that they get that the doctor orders, and that's always D2 usually.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Anything else before we move on from vitamin D that you want to share?
I guess in terms of food sources, because I touched on kind of fortified foods.
Yeah, that's really important, because the label looks so great. Oh, vitamin D, but what kind is it and where is it from? That's such a good point. Sure. Anything else you can talk more about?
Yeah. So, sunlight exposure is really the best way that you can manufacture vitamin D. Unfortunately, we don't get sun exposure year round, especially for me up in Canada. We get very few months of summer, so we have to really soak up that sunlight while we can. But foods like fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, fortified dairy products, like fortified foods in general, egg yolks are all potentially good sources of vitamin D. But unfortunately, for people who are darker skinned, who live in higher latitudes, sunlight exposure alone isn't sufficient. So it's best, of course, they get their blood levels, which is 25 hydroxy vitamin D levels, checked by their healthcare provider at least a couple times a year, just to see where you're at, during the summer versus in the winter, so that you and your healthcare provider can sort of adjust that ideal dose.
Yeah, that's important, because sometimes exactly what it is in the winter is going to be very different than what it is in the summer if you're outside.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to vitamin K2. And again, each of these we could talk for an hour on. So maybe just talk about, and there actually is a lot of controversy, but I think the most important thing is that a lot of times people aren't taking vitamin K2, and it's really so important for our bones and overall health. So why don't you share I'd love to hear your thoughts on both MK4, MK7.
Absolutely. And I want to preface this by saying I'm no expert when it comes to vitamin K2. I would encourage anyone listening, check out Margie's podcast with Dr. Barry Tan. He provides a really thorough review of K2, but kind of at a high level here, K2 comes in several forms, with MK4 and MK7 actually being the most researched. So you'll hear a lot of people saying MK7 has a longer half-life and arguably is present in the bloodstream longer than MK4. So some people might argue that makes it a better choice for some patients in their treatment plans. And there was a study in Osteoporosis International that could potentially support that. In terms of quality concerns, again, very, very similar to calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, really just ensuring that what's on the label is in the bottle and it's free from contaminants. In terms of food sources, K2 can be found in fermented foods. Dr. Tan covers this really nicely. So natto, dairy products, egg yolks, certain meats, and of course, supplements are often available with K2. They might contain a combination of ingredients. There might be D3 in there as well for synergistic effects. But of course, again, you need to be ensuring that the quality and source of these supplements is being verified and vetted. So kind of like switching gears here and getting more into like the nitty gritty of it. Timing of K2 can potentially impact its effectiveness. It's often suggested to take it with food to enhance absorption. Again, for more detail on that, definitely listen to that episode with Dr. Barry Tan. And while it's true that MK4 has a shorter half-life compared to MK7, there is some research and perspectives highlighting that this doesn't necessarily diminish its efficacy or its usefulness. So MK4 is actually quickly absorbed and utilized by various tissues in the body. It's the form that we actually produce ourselves. It's thought to play a direct role in activating proteins involved in blood clotting, bone health, and arterial health, potentially offering rapid benefits despite that shorter kind of like presence in the bloodstream. Some studies suggest that MK4 may be preferentially used by tissues like the brain and arteries. And that's tissue-specific uptake means MK4 could have targeted benefits that are not fully captured by measuring blood levels alone. And again, so despite its short half-life in the blood, MK4 has been shown to accumulate in the pancreas, salivary glands, arterial walls, and it has the potential there to exert long-term beneficial effects. And again, suggests that its biological impact extends beyond just that measurement of what's in the blood. There are clinical studies demonstrating the positive effects of MK4 on bone and cardiovascular support. So for example, MK4 has been used in Japan at very high doses to support osteoporosis patients with documented successes in helping bone support. It also has an excellent safety profile at higher doses. That makes it a viable option for healthcare provider recommendations where high dosing is necessary without significant concerns about toxicity or adverse effects. And again, as I touched on earlier, MK4 is the form of K2 found in certain animal products such as liver, eggs, and meat. And that natural occurrence, similar to what Dr. Tan was mentioning, suggests it's been part of the human diet for a very long time, potentially indicating its evolutionary importance and efficacy.
Okay, and I think the important thing is, did you want to touch on how it really helps the calcium get into the bones and
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. 100%. Yeah. It provides that sort of signal to calcium on essentially where to go. Right.
Yeah. And where not to go as well. I think that's one of the other things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's just so very important. And the good thing is the research, and so many of the doctors that I work with who have been working with osteoporosis, as taking an integrated approach, this has been so important for fracture reduction. So I think it's just a critical, something that's often overlooked, where people will be told calcium, vitamin D, and maybe magnesium, but typically, those are the two. And they really, a lot of times the conventional doctors won't talk about K2. So I think it's just something so important. One more thing about the D. What's your thought? Because there's so many supplements that are combined. They have the D3K2. What's your thought on that? Taking it together or taking it separately?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a strong opinion, but from the healthcare providers that I discussed this issue with, they just find that the majority of D3K2 combo products on the market don't have enough of a dose of either nutrient to really get that optimal dose for their patient. So they'll have to be taking, quite a high number of capsules or quite a lot of liquid to actually achieve that dose, and that it's just not economically viable.
Yeah, I've always had it separated as well because we want to get the optimal dose that's really been shown to be effective. That's sort of my thought. So I'm glad you feel that way too. Okay, so as I said, we could talk hours on that, but let's talk. You are such an expert on quality concern, and we talked about some of the testing. Are there other things that, I guess the nice thing is you being with Fullscript, that when people use Fullscript, you've done all the work for them. So the companies and the product, you want to share how you do that? So if they're buying something from your site, we know that those companies have done all the testing. How does that work? Because that's a big job of yours.
Yeah. Well, so that job isn't directly done by me. I can't take full credit for that. I work very closely with our quality assurance team on a lot of that. And any product that you see in the Fullscript catalog has been vetted. There are basic onboarding requirements, things like CGMPs, making sure that we actually go and take a look at some of the facilities where these, products are being manufactured, not just taking, the brand's word by them providing a written, proof of, yes, we adhere to CGMPs, but actually going and witnessing, pulling records, speaking to staff members there. As well as clinical efficacy, right? We strive to have products in the catalog that are easy to adhere to because you can get an optimal dose for your patient. Additionally, going above and beyond those kind of basic onboarding requirements, there are actually tons of supplements in the catalog that are third-party certified by organizations like NSF that I mentioned earlier. There's also the United States Pharmacopoeia, who's a great organization as well. They not only provide third-party certifications, but they also provide a lot of guidance in terms of testing. And they're constantly innovating in that space. They're constantly innovating in terms of, okay, what's the validated method for testing gummies? What's the validated method for testing new delivery formats? And they'll detail that in terms of how manufacturers need to follow those methods and how often they need to test. So it really goes back to purity, potency, and safety, as well as personalization. I can spend a lot of time speaking about quality, and maybe in the future you can have me back and we can kind of do a deep dive on all things quality, because I think there's a lot more to tease apart there. And I'm sure, there'll be a lot more news stories that come out. There was recently a Health Canada recall of a large brand in Canada for actually the presence of metal fibers. So it was actually traced back to a contract manufacturer for a certain B vitamin. And unfortunately, that manufacturer used that B vitamin in a whole host of products. So all those products actually had to be recalled. So yeah, it's just something to be mindful of. As you mentioned, not going out and just buying the cheapest product you can find online, because unfortunately, sometimes there's counterfeiting, right? It's not actually the product that it's advertised to be. This happens a lot of the time on those online reseller platforms where there are third-party resellers. So, the person or the people that are running that platform don't necessarily know who's selling that supplement. And it's unfortunately a very sketchy practice in my mind, because you don't know where that supplement is coming from. It could be counterfeit. So it's best to purchase from reputable brands and from platforms like Fullscript that have that one-to-one relationship with the brands that are in the catalog to ensure that that's actually where the product is coming from.
It's so upsetting that you can, because it will look exactly. When I first heard that, I said, really? I said, it's that if they take the bottle and they put something else in, and I just couldn't even believe it that people could do something so deceptive. And, people are just, oh, I can get this for less. Let me do that. So I guess one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on was to warn people, to educate, because I believe knowledge is power, but also to warn people that just don't go out and whatever you see, buy it. And, it's so important to do more, because it may not be helping you, but B, it could actually be full of those fillers and full of ingredients that are toxic. So but the good news is there's companies like Fullscript that will do all the work for you. I mean, I think that's so wonderful. I've been using Fullscript for, oh gosh, probably 13 years or something.
Wow.
Because or whenever I first got introduced to it, but just because you don't have to worry about it. And you, as I said, you're doing that work, which is so wonderful, because it is a little. I also teach happiness. You probably don't know that about me, but I'm very much into not being overwhelmed. And if you have to think about, oh my gosh, and I think that's also why it's really good. I have a whole list on Fullscript of the ones that I vetted and I like, and that the doctors I work with, people we've had good success with. But I think also when you're working with your practitioner is going to give you the companies that they recommend, so I think that. That's why it's nice to work with someone or to feel comfortable in what you're ordering, that you're not just, all right, I need magnesium. Because sometimes they'll do that. Okay, get magnesium or get this. Like, what do I do? It can be, it can be really tough.
So I agree. And that's one of my main goals. I really want to help educate consumers, healthcare providers, and patients on all things quality. So they're much more informed. And if they do say something like, go pick up a magnesium, they can say something like, go pick up a magnesium that has certification for GMPs, or go pick up a magnesium that has an NSF certification, and then that way you can ensure that they're getting a pure, potent and safe product.
So in terms of what else is on the Fullscript, because people can go on and see, and I'll have all the links, but what else, when they go there, I mean, I know the answer to this, but I want you to share because there are many other resources than just the supplements that are available to people. You want to just share what else is, what else you provide?
We have a great, team at Fullscript. We're constantly innovating in terms of new features, but I think Fullscript really provides the benefit of whole person care collaboration. Given the amount of misinformation out there in terms of health information, the health journey is really most successful when it's between a health expert or a healthcare provider and a patient. So the Fullscript platform makes it incredibly easy for patients and providers to work closer together. And we've actually seen in a recent study that patients are 73% more engaged and consistent, and reach up to 45% improvement in lab markers by using the platform. Additionally, Fullscript offers providers an all-in-one clinical tool for scaling and delivering whole person care with high-quality labs, high-quality supplements, all under one roof. Patients get actually one source of truth for their personalized health journey, direct access to those high quality, safe supplements, and a whole host of engagement tools that help keep them motivated. Because as we know, adherence to your treatment plan, it can be tough sometimes, right? It can be tough for people to remember to take their supplements. So, we provide a lot of reminders, auto ship, a lot of engagement tools that can help patients stay motivated.
I think from a practical point of view, a couple of things. Number one, it's one stop, and because you have so many brands, so you really have a tremendous array of outstanding brands. The other thing that really is a good deal, if you spend $50, which isn't that much when you're talking about supplements, it's free shipping. So that's I think a very big deal, because a lot of times that shipping adds up in terms of. So yeah, I think that's
absolutely. That's a great one to call out.
Good thing. And the other thing I notice, I don't know, maybe it's where I live, but if I need something quickly, I mean, honestly, I get it. It's very quick. Your turnaround, I've noticed this more than really any other company. Your turnaround is so fast, which is really wonderful. Anyway, it's just, I appreciate everything you do to make this easy for people so that they can get high quality supplements. And yes, this has been so helpful. And we could all talk for hours and hours and hours, but I think you brought up some really good points. I learned some new things. I had no idea about the gummies. Not that I take them, but I didn't realize that. There's a lot of things. So is there anything that we left out that you think is important for the listeners to know?
I think that sort of covers it. I mean, to recap, again, holding, I think, brands and manufacturers accountable for the claims on their supplements is really important. So again, asking what kind of testing they're doing, if they can provide proof of testing, that I think will be a major thing, as well as certification. So being mindful of, there could be certifications at the facility level, so where they manufacture, and there are also certifications at the product level. So it's important to know the difference between the two, and the latter, the certifications at that product level, will actually show up on the physical label of the supplement. So things to just keep an eye out for.
Okay, well, this has just been so informative. I can't thank you enough. And I just really appreciate taking the time and sharing all this great information with all of us.
Oh, thank you so much, Margie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Viegas as much as I did, and now have some new information that you can put into your life about supplements. Make sure to check out my Fullscript dispensary on Fullscript, and you can go to there by going to tinyurl.com/supplements4less, or you can just click the link in the show notes. And in Fullscript, you'll see my favorite bone health supplements, as well as all the supplements that they carry that have been vetted for quality, which I just think is so important, because we want to be safe. We want to make sure we're not wasting any of our money. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.